In this episode, we study Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 17, which describes a cosmic battle between good and evil. The archangel Michael and his angels fight against the dragon, identified as the devil or Satan, and his angels. The dragon and his followers are defeated and cast out of heaven to the earth. This event marks the arrival of salvation and the power of God's kingdom. However, the devil, full of wrath, is now on earth, knowing his time is short. The dragon persecutes a woman who had given birth to a male child, but she is protected by God, escaping to the wilderness. The dragon attempts to destroy her with a flood, but the earth helps her by swallowing the flood. Enraged, the dragon turns his anger toward the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commandments and hold the testimony of Jesus Christ. Does this passage describe our future, or has it already happened? Let's find out.
Verse number 7. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought against his angels. So in verse number 7, we see that this was a war. And Jimmy, if we understand Genesis 3:15, this war that we're talking about was fought at the cross of Christ. This is not done with swords. This is a spiritual battle. And so let's go ahead and turn to Isaiah chapter 27 and verse number 1.
In that day, the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea.
So we have this picture here of the future destruction of Satan done by Christ at the cross. And it's done in the imagery of Leviathan, which we read in the book of Job. Now remember, where did Leviathan live? He lived in the sea, which is, remember in Genesis, during the creation of the world, it was the Spirit of God that moved over the face of the deep. It's the deep that is the place where all the monsters live in Genesis chapter 1. We can go into that another time. And he starts describing one of those to Job with the idea of Leviathan. We have him here in Isaiah chapter 27. Now this water creature, which you remember the water theme that we have in the book of Revelation, water is representative of the Gentile nations, whereas the land is representative of Israel. So now we have the water creature that God has slain with his sword, and he has taken out the most terrifying thing the Jews could possibly imagine, the water creature, the water monster, the sea monster, if you will. The sea represents chaos. It represents uncertainty. It represents no foundation. And so in the Bible, the metaphor of water begins in Genesis chapter 1. And when the Spirit of God moves over the water, then dry land appears. And dry land is representative of God's presence. And so if dry land is a representative of God's presence and water is the chaos without his presence, then obviously higher dry land, more away from water, is even more of the presence of God. And that's how we get our mountain theming from Genesis chapter 1. That the higher the place, the more of the presence of God, because water is more chaotic. So you have essentially then the mountain theme created in Genesis 1, where you see every time God is communicating with people, it's on the top of a mountain. We have Mount Sinai where the law is given. We have, the ark rested on the mountains, plural of Ararat. We have Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount. We see the Olivet discourse on the Mount of Olives and so forth. It's this theming when Jesus in Matthew 13, 14, and 15 wants to get alone. He goes to the mountain to pray. So this theming is all throughout. And Jerusalem itself is a city on a hill. We have the mountains of God as Eden, it says in Ezekiel 28. So Eden itself was on a mountain. So we see this theming throughout. So Leviathan is the opposite of that. He is the sea monster. And here is the imagery in Isaiah 27 that he is destroyed by the sword out of the mouth of God. Now here you have Michael is doing this. And let's go ahead and turn to Daniel chapter 12 and verse number 1.
And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book.
So here we have the imagery of what Jesus did on the cross and what he did for us. And it's the idea that Michael is in charge of kicking out any access that Satan might have into heaven. And so this great war was fought. And the imagery here is very, very simple. We have a little bit of this in the book of Job in chapter 1 when the sons of God, which we'll get into this another time, we get in our Nephilim study. But I believe those are people. And in Job chapter 1, and anyway, so when Satan comes in among them, he's walking up and down on the earth there, and he's accusing. My point here is he's accusing the brethren. He's the accuser of the brethren. In fact, we really don't have a proper noun name for Satan. We call him Satan. That just means the accuser. He was never given a name in the Bible, actually. And if somebody wants to ask more questions on that in the comments, I'd be happy to answer that.
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't given a proper name. It's not like his name was, Joe, Tim, Satan. Satan just means enemy or adversary. He's probably the most proper name we were given for him is the accuser. Now, this is important. When we're getting into the idea of Satan being the accuser, let me make clear something, because this is This is so crucial for your understanding here. When we have the Old Testament and the Lord God is making people righteous before him, okay, he is using the sacrificial system. And so, if you've committed this sin or this sin, then I want you to do this, this sacrifice. This is a burnt offering. This is a meal offering, peace offering, and so forth. Now, the mechanism that God used for the sacrificial system is he used, for the sacrificial system, he used people. These are the high priests. So he used the line of Aaron, and these people that we call the high priests, these are the people that he used to make them atone for their sin. We call it the Day of Atonement. Leviticus chapter 16 outlines this. Here's the problem. And it's a big one. The problem is, Jimmy, you're using people who are wicked to atone for people who are wicked. Boy, it just seems like a problem. Okay, so I need you who are not perfect to perform a perfect act, lamb without blemish, on this day, at this time. Go to the laver first. Don't miss any of these steps. Wear this garment. Your garment has to have this on it. This is what you say. This is what you do. You're an imperfect high priest. And then that will atone for your sin. And at that moment, you're walking around perfect, and you can then atone for everybody else. So Satan, if you guys can imagine this, so Satan's walking around, pen and paper, and he's just walking around the high priest, and he's going, got it. That certainly wasn't done right. Okay, got it. Oh, you missed, your foot was in the wrong place there. Oh, you definitely didn't have the best lamb you could find there. I think that one's better. I'm going to make that case. And he takes his list, Jimmy, and he presents it before God. And this is the argument. The argument is, and we're going to get into this a little bit more in our later verses here. The argument is, how can you, being a just God, justify an unjust person? If you do that, you're no longer a just God. And that's Satan's argument. In other words, can I say it this way? He was a prosecuting attorney, and he found a legal foothold in the Old Testament system. And here's basically what it was. God was using the very people who needed to be cleansed to be a part of the cleansing of the other people. Satan knew that was a weak system. And he was the accuser of the brethren. He got them on motive.
Wasn't his name Lucifer?
Do you want to get into that now?
No. That's just a little.
Okay.
That's just a little teaser.
If somebody says that in the comments, I used to believe that also, and we can get into that in Isaiah chapter 14, I believe it is, or 12, 14, something like that. But yeah, we'll get into that. Somebody put that in the comments. I'll answer it in another video. But yes. So, anyways, this is the weakness of the system. Okay, so he becomes the accuser of the brethren. All right. Now, another system happens when Christ dies on the cross. When Christ dies on the cross, he does away with the old covenant system, and Christ then has a new covenant. And the new covenant is in his own blood. He's the lamb in this case. He performs the ceremony. He offers his own blood, and he offers it before the mercy seat as the priest. So Jesus is now the sacrifice and the priest. Essentially, what Jesus did is he ended this system. This system was weak. It's called the ministry of death in Hebrews. It was very weak in the sense that he was using people to atone for other people. But when Jesus comes in the new covenant, if I can say it this way, Jesus Christ closed every legal loophole that Satan could ever use against us, because it's an airtight process. And this is what we're seeing in this chapter. There was a war in heaven with Michael and his angels. Let's read, if we could, Jimmy, Hebrews chapter 2 and verses 14 and 15.
Forasmuch then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver them who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage.
My question to those that are following along, according to Hebrews chapter 2, is when did this happen? When did this happen? Hebrews chapter 2 and 14 through 15, it talks about children are partakers of the flesh and blood. It talks about the idea that Jesus will destroy him that has power over death. What mechanism did Christ use to destroy him, that's Satan, that had the power of death? It even says that is the devil. At what point did that happen? The answer's in verse 14, and it says that through death, whose death? The death of Jesus on the cross.
Yeah.
When Jesus died on the cross, he destroyed the power of death that belonged to Satan, that is the devil. And then what did he do in verses 15 through 16? He delivered them through fear of death, were all their lifetime subject to bondage. For verily he took not on him the nature of angels, but took on him the seed of Abraham. Seed story, Genesis 3:15. That's the whole story of the Bible. You keep these two seeds separate and you win. They start to mix and you can't win. There's enmity, there's division between these two lines. If these two lines are getting together, then there's no redemption of mankind. You keep these two lines separate, then you're okay. And what happened was in the book of Genesis is they started to mix. And so God brought about the flood. He isolated one family that wasn't mixed with Noah and his family, and he drowned everybody else out. It's not that he was like, your wickedness is so bad, although their wickedness was terrible. It says the wickedness of every imagination of their heart was only a wicked continually in Genesis chapter 6. And so we see that it was horrible, but it was more so that the judgment on the world was to wipe out the mixture of these two godly lines to bring about the godly line of redemption. That's the story of the Bible. That is the story we're reading here. It's so very clear.
If you like this video, hit that like and subscribe button, and check out the full episode by clicking the link below.